On October 17, 1997, a confidential tip was received by Sheriff Thomas Wilkins, a call that would permanently alter the tranquil small-town life of Oak Ridge in the Oregon interior. The report, lodged by a resident who opted for anonymity, spoke of peculiar sounds emanating from the secluded homestead of the Blackwood family, a clan established in that rugged, mountainous area since the mid-19th century. "Something is amiss in that barn. I've never seen anyone enter or leave, but at night, I occasionally hear shouts. They're not animal sounds," stated the archived recording of the call, preserved by the Lane County Police. What law enforcement discovered at the Blackwood farm, situated roughly 40 kilometers from Oak Ridge Center, surpassed all conceivable expectations. Concealed by thick foliage and encircled by a barbed wire barrier nearly 3 meters high, stood a worn, red barn. From a distance, it seemed typical, but its sole entryway was secured with multiple locks, chains, and heavy-duty padlocks. The first thing to assault the officers as they forced the door open was the stench, a noxious blend of urine, feces, and an unidentifiable odor that one officer later described as the very absence of humanity. Inside, with minimal light filtering through roof cracks, officers found 7 women aged between 12 and 42, living in conditions that the official police report deemed incompatible with any standard of human dignity. "I was stunned," Dr. Michael Stevenson, a coroner assisting with the operation, told the Portland Herald. "In 27 years of medicine, I've never witnessed anything comparable." The women displayed physical traits that immediately suggested severe consanguinity and prolonged deprivation, facial malformations, extra fingers, and significant vision impairment. Yet, their eyes were the most unsettling feature, all shared the same vacant, uniform stare. Further inquiries would reveal the barn held not just victims, but the product of a generational experiment of family endogamy spanning at least 5 generations. Genetic documentation obtained at the University of Oregon would later confirm that these women represented possibly the most inbred individuals ever recorded in modern United States history. The property was officially owned by Jeremiah Blackwood, then 68, the patriarch of a family that had grown increasingly detached from the local community over the decades. What began as simple social isolation eventually unfolded into one of the most harrowing accounts of abuse, confinement, and intentional genetic manipulation ever chronicled. The initial investigation established that 4 of the 7 women were Jeremiah's biological daughters, while the other 3 were the result of subsequent unions between his own children over the years. The coefficient of inbreeding for some of the women, as calculated by University of Washington geneticists, approached 0.375, figures rarely observed outside of extremely isolated populations. "This was neither an accident nor a matter of ignorance," explained Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the forensic geneticist leading the case. "We discovered detailed journals that clearly indicate a deliberate goal to establish what they termed a pure lineage. There were notes detailing specific physical attributes, attempts to select traits like bone structure and eye color through planned pairings among close relatives." The Blackwood case not only horrified the small local area but also reignited national debates regarding rural seclusion, the efficacy of community oversight, and the boundaries of family privacy in remote American areas. The genesis of isolation, from the Great Depression to paranoia. The Blackwood family's history traces back to the Great Depression, when Elijah Blackwood, Jeremiah's grandfather, purchased the 200-acre property in 1931 for a fraction of its market price. Records from Lane County show that Elijah, a former miner who lost everything in the economic crash, paid just $175 for the land. Even for that era, the price was considered exceedingly low. Local historical archives suggest the reason for the low cost was the property's sinister reputation. In 1924, the previous owner, John Wickman, had murdered his entire family before taking his own life. This event, though seemingly unconnected to the Blackwoods, established a foundation of superstition and isolation that would determine the family's future. Elijah Blackwood settled there with his wife Martha and 5 children. Sparse school records from the Oak Ridge Municipal Library show the children attended the local school for a mere year before being withdrawn for home education. The official school dismissal form, dated 1933, includes an observation from the then director: "Family displays highly unusual, non-assimilating behavior. Children possess knowledge appropriate for their age but actively avoid contact with other pupils." The family's visits to the town were infrequent, limited to only 2 or 3 times a year for purchasing essential goods they could not produce themselves. A diary kept by the local general store owner between 1935 and 1940, now preserved at the Oak Ridge Historical Museum, notes, "The Blackwoods came in today. As usual, Mrs. B and the children remained in the car while the old man did the shopping. Nobody in that family ever smiles. Bought unusual quantities of kerosene and ammunition. Something feels wrong about them." During World War II, when military recruiters visited the farm in 1943, they were met with armed resistance. Police reports from that time state that Elijah threatened the officers with a shotgun, declaring that no Blackwood would die for a government that only remembers its men when it needs them to die. For reasons not fully detailed in the archives, the authorities chose not to press the issue. It was against this backdrop of isolation and deep-seated paranoia that Harold Blackwood, Elijah's middle son and Jeremiah's father, was raised. Documents recovered during the 1997 investigation show Harold married his second cousin, Rebecca, who lived in Idaho. The marriage was registered in Boise in 1952, but Rebecca was never seen by the Oak Ridge community. Harold showed up one day with a wife, recalled Eleanor Wilson, a former local postal worker, in her testimony at age 93. "We truly never saw her face. She stayed in the car, always wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a veil, even during the summer. Letters addressed to her from Idaho ceased after a couple of years. Medical records found on the property indicate Rebecca delivered 6 children between 1953 and 1962, all at home without professional medical care. Only 3 survived past infancy: Jeremiah, born 1956, Mary, 1958, and Joseph, 1961. The remaining 3 infants succumbed to congenital complications, according to notes Harold made in an improvised family medical notebook. A disturbing entry in this notebook, dated 1962, suggests the moment the ideology of genetic isolation started to solidify, Rebecca is too frail for more children. But we have no need for outsiders. We possess our own pure blood, strong as iron when kept unmixed. The weak perish so the strong can thrive. This is the law of nature that city dwellers have forgotten." When Harold died in a tractor accident in 1978, Jeremiah, then 22, assumed control of the family and the farm. Tax records from that period indicate the family had expanded the main house and erected 2 additional structures, one of which was the barn that would become the epicenter of the horror discovered 2 decades later. Jeremiah's reign, genetic manipulation and the Red Barn. Under Jeremiah's leadership, the family's isolation deepened. While his father still maintained minimal contact with town for necessary purchases, Jeremiah reduced these interactions to almost nil. Records from the agricultural supply store show the last purchase by a Blackwood took place in 1983, when Jeremiah bought large quantities of seeds, tools, and construction supplies, enough to sustain a prolonged period of total self-sufficiency. The most alarming discovery, revealed by the journals confiscated in 1997, was the transformation from simple social avoidance to a deliberate project of genetic purification. Jeremiah, who developed an apparent self-taught fascination with genetics through books found on the property, began systematically cataloging family physical traits and meticulously planning unions between relatives. "The outside world contaminates the blood," he wrote in a 1985 entry. "Each generation that remains pure fortifies our essence. The weak will die, the strong will prosper. In 5 generations, we will have created something the world has never witnessed." The Red Barn, constructed in 1980 according to records, was designed from the outset not as an agricultural structure, but as a containment space. Detailed, hand-drawn schematics by Jeremiah show a 2-story building featuring internal dividers, a rudimentary water supply, and, most disturbingly, an elaborate lock system that could only be operated from the exterior. The 7 women rescued in 1997 were living in conditions police reports characterized as medieval. The ground floor of the barn held a shared central area with a long wooden table, some basic benches, and a wood stove for minimal heat during Oregon's harsh winters. The second floor was divided into small cubicles serving as individual sleeping areas, each furnished with a straw mattress and a bucket for sanitation. There was no electricity. There was no proper plumbing, noted the social services report. Water was provided by a gutter system that collected rainwater in barrels. During dry spells, Jeremiah or his brother Joseph apparently fetched water from a nearby well. The barn's windows were boarded up and covered, allowing light only through tiny cracks and a few translucent roof tiles. Psychologists who evaluated the victims noted this was a deliberate method of temporal disorientation. The women had only a vague sense of the passing days, dependent on the limited natural light penetrating these restricted openings. The case took an even darker turn when Sarah, the oldest rescued woman at 42, began speaking to investigators. Sarah, identified as Jeremiah's biological daughter with his own sister, Mary, had been the first to be confined to the barn at age 15. "Daddy told us we were unique, that our blood was purer than any family in America," Sarah shared in a recorded statement, now part of the FBI's Extreme Case Study Program. "He kept books on how breeders maintain pure animal strains. He said we were doing the same, only better." According to Sarah's testimony and the journals, the system operated with chilling family methodology. Upon reaching puberty, the girls were moved to the barn. They were visited regularly by Jeremiah or Joseph, a rotation system documented in notebooks found in the main house. These visits led to frequent pregnancies, many ending in stillbirths or miscarriages. Weak infants did not survive, and this was considered natural, even desirable, explained Dr. Robert Peterson, the forensic psychiatrist assigned to the case. Male children who survived were eventually taken into the main house for training, while the girls remained in the barn with their mothers, ensuring the cycle's perpetuation. The women's daily life, as reconstructed by investigators, centered on domestic work, sewing, simple food preparation, cleaning their confined space, and tending to a small, enclosed garden adjacent to the barn, where they were allowed brief, supervised outings. Ironically, this garden was the sole source of beauty in their existence, with various flower species interspersed among the vegetables, creating a surreal contrast to their dark reality. Makeshift medical records kept by Jeremiah revealed a chilling clinical detachment. Each woman had a file detailing her physical traits, pregnancy history, and, most disturbingly, her reproductive value, classified on a scale of 1 to 10. The food provided was surprisingly nutritious yet monotonous, consisting mainly of farm-grown vegetables, eggs, milk, and occasional meat. It was not a typical case of nutritional deficiency, noted nutritionist Elizabeth Dawson in her report. On the contrary, there was an almost obsessive focus on specific nutrients. "We found homemade herbal supplements, apparently formulated to strengthen the blood as described in Jeremiah's notebooks. Communication with the outside world was non-existent. The women had no access to newspapers, radios, or any other news source. Their knowledge was limited to what they taught each other and the few books permitted in the barn, mostly practical manuals on home medicine and agriculture, and, unsettlingly, an altered Bible from which Jeremiah had excised certain passages and inserted his own writings. One of the most disturbing finds was the notebooks of Emma, the second oldest woman at 37. Hidden beneath her mattress, they contained detailed drawings of what she imagined the outside world to be, based only on the few stories from the older women and the scarce images in the available books. Her illustrations of modern cities resembled 19th-century sketches, underscoring the profound informational void they inhabited. They evolved their own system of communication, explained Dr. Linda Morris, the linguist who studied their interactions after the rescue. It wasn't a new language, exactly, but they used common words with specific meanings that only they understood. For instance, they referred to the sun as the vigilante and had dozens of distinct terms to describe the sounds the barn made during storms. When questioned about escape attempts or resistance, the women displayed conditioned fear. "Where could we possibly go?" asked Lily, then 23, during one therapy session. "Daddy told us the outside world was full of radiation, that people were sick and deformed. He said we were the only healthy ones left, and one day, when it was safe, we would leave and repopulate the earth." This apocalyptic mythology, fabricated by Jeremiah to rationalize their isolation, had been built over decades, incorporating and twisting real-world events. He distorted news of the Chernobyl nuclear accident, the AIDS epidemic, and other global crises, presenting them as proof of civilization's impending collapse. Medical and psychological fallout, the price of endogamy. When the 7 women were finally examined at the University Medical Center of Oregon, doctors confirmed the physical toll of generations of inbreeding. The medical report, later published as an anonymous case study in the American Journal of Medical Genetics, detailed a concentration of conditions rarely seen. The pattern of anomalies observed indicates severe and sustained consanguinity across multiple generations, wrote Dr. James Richardson, the study's lead geneticist. We are witnessing the expression of numerous rare recessive genes that would typically remain dormant in populations with greater genetic diversity. Among the most obvious conditions was polydactyly, extra fingers or toes, present in 5 of the 7 women, severe dental malformations, including oligodontia, missing multiple teeth, and microdontia, abnormally small teeth, and heterochromia, each eye being a different color, in 4 of the women, a trait Jeremiah seemingly valued and attempted to select for, based on his diaries. More worrisome were the internal issues. Imaging revealed heart malformations in every woman, ranging from minor septal defects to more serious conditions like the tetralogy of Fallot found in 2 of them. The most critical case was that of Rose, 19, whose medical report stated she exhibited a combination of conditions rarely seen together in a single patient: craniosynnosis, premature fusion of skull bones resulting in severe facial deformity, achondroplasia, a form of dwarfism, and a severe immunological deficiency that made her extremely infection-prone. Her survival to this age without medical intervention is remarkable. April, one of the younger women at 14, suffered from phenylketonuria, a rare metabolic disorder that went untreated, leading to irreversible neurological damage. The cognitive and psychological impact was equally profound. Neuropsychological testing revealed that 5 of the 7 women had some level of intellectual disability, though it was difficult to separate the effects of genetic factors from the extreme sensory and educational deprivation. Sarah's case is particularly noteworthy, said neuropsychologist Dr. Patricia Winters. Despite the extreme isolation, she showed above-average cognitive capacity. She taught herself to read using the few available books and then instructed the others. She even developed a complex system for counting time based on the light patterns entering the roof cracks. DNA testing, using state-of-the-art technology for the time, confirmed the physical evidence. The inbreeding coefficient in some of the younger women reached levels seldom documented in modern medical literature. In simple terms, the DNA of these women contains lengthy identical segments on both chromosomes, explained Dr. Richardson in a 1999 interview with Scientific American. This only happens when the same genes are inherited from both parents, who in turn share very close common ancestors. In general populations, we see small segments like this, reflecting distant common ancestry. But in this case, up to 37% of the genome in some of the younger women consisted of these identical segments, numbers we would only find in extremely isolated population groups. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery was the documentation retrieved from the main house. In a locked office, investigators found dozens of notebooks where Jeremiah had meticulously chronicled his observations over decades. These journals revealed that the patriarch was fully aware of the genetic risks but viewed them as a necessary phase of purification. The first generations must suffer so that the future ones can transcend, he wrote in a 1992 entry. The ancient Egyptians understood this. Pharaohs married their sisters for divine, not worldly, reasons. The weak are naturally eliminated. The strong survive and are made stronger. In another 10 generations, we will have created a superior lineage. This corruption of fundamental scientific knowledge to justify extreme abuse reflected a toxic convergence of paranoia, isolation, and pathological narcissism. Jeremiah constructed an elaborate belief system by mixing poorly understood elements of genetics, decontextualized religious references, and conspiracy theories about racial purity and the genetic decline of modern society. Among the books found were early 20th century texts on eugenics, treatises on animal husbandry, and, surprisingly, recent academic books on population genetics, suggesting Jeremiah occasionally obtained updated materials, possibly via mail order. He was not an uneducated man, Dr. Peterson stated in his psychological evaluation. He demonstrated considerable intelligence, but it was severely warped by his isolation, possible untreated mental illness, and selective exposure to information that validated his pre-existing beliefs. It's a classic example of how knowledge, when divorced from ethical supervision or adequate social context, can be dangerously misapplied. Aftermath and legacy, justice and resilience. The morning of October 21, 1997, ushered in a new chapter for the 7 women of the Blackwood barn. Following 4 days of initial medical assessments, they were moved to a specialized facility in Portland, where a comprehensive team of doctors, psychologists, social workers, and special educators began what would become one of the most challenging rehabilitation efforts ever documented in the United States. The fate of Jeremiah and Joseph Blackwood proceeded along a parallel path. Both were apprehended the day the barn was discovered, and following extensive psychiatric evaluations, were deemed fit to stand trial. In September 1998, after a 3-week trial that garnered national media attention, Jeremiah was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for multiple charges, including incest, kidnapping, child abuse, and rape. Joseph, who prosecutors argued acted under the psychological coercion of his older brother, received a 45-year prison sentence. This is more than just a case of extreme abuse, declared Judge Elelina Hayes during the sentencing. It is a case of the deliberate and systematic perversion of fundamental human principles, sustained over decades and affecting multiple generations. The court rarely encounters circumstances where a defendant's social reintegration is deemed fundamentally impossible, but this is one of those cases. Jeremiah remained unmoving throughout the proceedings, refusing to recognize the court's authority. His sole statement during the sentencing phase revealed the depth of his delusion: "You do not comprehend what you have destroyed. It was not a prison, it was a sanctuary. It was not cruelty, it was guided evolution. In a century, when your lineages are frail and diseased, the world will lament what was lost here." Joseph, however, progressively showed signs of grasping the severity of his actions. In a letter to the court before sentencing, he wrote, "I was raised to believe the world was as Jeremiah described it. I never knew any other reality. This doesn't excuse what I did, but perhaps it explains how a person can become an accomplice to something so monstrous without fully recognizing its horror." The process of reintegration for the 7 women would be complex and protracted. The specialized program designed for them by the University of Oregon, later dubbed the Blackwood Protocol, became a blueprint for complex rescue cases involving prolonged isolation victims. "We couldn't simply drop them into the modern world," explained Dr. Catherine Morris, the program coordinator. "Everything from the ceaseless noise of a city to basic concepts like electricity, the internet, or television was completely foreign to them. We had to establish a transitional environment where they could be gradually exposed to aspects of contemporary life, always with intensive psychological support." The case gained a new dimension in 2001 when Sarah Blackwood, the oldest survivor, published her memoir with Dr. Morris's assistance. The book, Born in Darkness: Memories of the Blackwood Barn, became an instant bestseller and was later adapted into an award-winning HBO documentary. The proceeds were placed into a trust to finance the survivors' ongoing treatment and education. "We are not merely victims," Sarah wrote in the book's epilogue. "We are survivors, and now, finally, we are people with the right to our own futures. The story of the barn is over, but our individual stories are only just beginning." The ramifications of the Blackwood case reached beyond the individuals directly involved. In 2003, the United States Congress passed Sarah's Law, which instituted new protocols for monitoring children in homeschooling situations in isolated rural areas. The law also established dedicated funds to train professionals in rural communities to identify signs of extreme family abuse. In the scientific community, the anonymous medical data collected from the Blackwood women, always with their informed consent, provided a significant boost to understanding the human effects of severe consanguinity. A longitudinal study currently underway at the University of Washington continues to monitor the genetic, medical, and psychological aspects of the case, leading to dozens of scientific publications that have helped advance treatments for various rare genetic disorders. In 2015, 18 years after the rescue, the Blackwood property was finally torn down after being acquired by the state of Oregon. A modest memorial was erected on the site of the barn, a simple bronze plaque inscribed with words to honor the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extreme cruelty, and to remember that isolation must never supplant community vigilance. Of the 7 women rescued, 5 eventually achieved independent lives, though they required varying levels of ongoing support. Rose and April, whose genetic conditions were the most severe, remained in specialized care. Sarah, the oldest, became a respected activist for the rights of abuse victims and a powerful symbol of resilience. In her 2010 speech at the National Conference on Child Abuse, she offered a compelling perspective. People frequently ask me how I endured those years in the barn. The truth is, I survived because I never realized there was an alternative. Now I know there was an entire world beyond those walls. My mission is to ensure that no child ever grows up without knowing they are entitled to that world. The legacy of the Blackwood case endures as a grim caution against the extremes of human isolation and the abuse that can flourish when communities lose touch with their most secluded members. It also serves as a testament to the remarkable human capacity for recovery and adaptation, even after experiences that challenge the boundaries of comprehension.